Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Force-Space. Thanks so much for joining us for today's event, Frames of Reference, Sensing Nostalgia Differently with Research and Creation. And this is brought to us by the Nostagain Network, which is one of the first student-led research collectives in North America that's focused on the generative potentials of nostalgia. And it's also part of our ongoing project working with Concordia Public Scholars, working directly with Richie Suriacha-Nikorn to help bring this all together. But we would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And we respect the continued connections with the past, the present, and the future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Here at Force-Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities that examine research questions, creations, projects, things happening all across the university. Now, we're also running today's event as a live stream both to YouTube and via Zoom. So those of you joining us there, if you have any comments, you have questions, anything, just pop that into the chat and we'll do our best to read those out a little bit later on. Those of you here in the space, we're gonna be running around with microphones. So if you have any comments and questions, just raise your hand so we can bring one over to you. Okay, to give us some more words of introduction, it's very much my pleasure to pass the microphone over to one of the communication team for Nostagain. Derek Passborg, over to you.
Thanks, Doug. Just like to welcome everybody this morning, as well as Doug did it. Welcome everybody in person, welcome everybody online to Frames of Reference 2026. The Nostagain Network recognizes the traditional territories upon which each participant and or attendee works and or lives as either invited or uninvited guests. The Ganyangahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters in which we gather today. The work of the Nostagain Network is committed to honoring and enacting respect and ethics in the work we do on all traditional and ancestral lands. Now, without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to my colleague, Richie.
Hi, my name is Richie. I am a Concordia Public Scholar. Welcome to Nostagain's Frames of Reference Nostalgia Symposium and Research Creation Expo. You saw that last year, that great game Minecraft came out? Last year. This year, hey, Thomas, you ready for the World Cup? Hey, Laurie, did you know Obama got elected last year? Wow, we have a great year ahead of us for American democracy. And there's this new thing, Kenza, called Facebook that just came out a couple of years ago. Man, does it feel good to be in the 2010s. 2010s. My wrinkles are still here. Toothaches. 2010s? This ain't the 2010s. You ever heard that word, nostalgia? Anybody here has nostalgia for a time that already happened, but you're still feeling it? You're still embodying it? Parts of you, objects you still have. It's funny that for Nostagain, a network that was founded to talk with scholars and artists, both established, junior, and creative, we've found that for most people across our 4 years since we've started, their nostalgias is actually not for a time that happened. Their nostalgias is actually not for an object that existed as it was. For a lot of folks, their nostalgia echoes what Svetlana Boym, one of the foundational thinkers of nostalgia, says is a longing for the past, not for the way it was, but for the way it could have been. Ernst Bloch says it's for the not yet, the utopian. Mark Fisher says it's a lost future. It's something that's locked away, hidden, waiting to emerge yet again, repressed. So why is it that it takes a generative, nostalgic research creation expo and symposium for us to realize that nostalgia is more than meets the eye? For us to realize that nostalgia, for many of us, is not truly a return or a desire to get back to things the way they were, but rather to try and restore or bring back familiarity in an increasingly unfamiliar world. To bring back norms, traditions, perhaps even civilities in a world full of unprecedentedness. Perhaps nostalgia is less about the past, but more about securing a present that we can all call a nostalgic thing for our futures. A good nostalgic project, a good nostalgic time. Part of what the Nostagain Network does, as North America's first and largest student-led network exploring nostalgia, is to ask one question: how can we use nostalgia for the future? And that's what we hope today, in the spirit of a symposium, which you can feel free to laugh, to dance, to argue, I'm not gonna say what that is on the transcript, but the idea of a symposium very much is that forum, that intimate forum to really explore and challenge something as politicized and studied as nostalgia, to break it down together. We break to rebuild, after all. So, opening our first keynote will be Dr. Sarah Ganzon, Assistant Professor in Communications at Simon Fraser University, who will be talking about the Belle Epoque, right? That 19th century, sort of that time that painters in the 19th century looked at, especially during the wars, right? But through the lens of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, a video game that tackles it, romanticizes that past, perhaps even genderizes it, and how it is that we can literally play with that past. So I turn it over to you, Dr. Ganzon. Take it away. Thanks, Sarah.
Hi, there you go. I'm finally unmuted. It took me forever to find that mute button. Let me share that. Let me share my screen again. Current slide. Oh, I lost Zoom. Give me a second. Sorry. It's still here, but portion of the screen, please. Share. There you go. Can you all see my screen? All good? Okay. Firstly, thank you so much for coming to my virtual keynote. I'm sorry I was not able to make it in person. I really want to be there. Unfortunately, my responsibilities here at SFU prevent me from coming there in person. But I'm really excited to do this because I'm going to be sharing a work in progress that I'm doing for a book project that I'm writing. And so what you will be seeing today will be a portion of a book chapter that I'm currently writing and revising. And this is a book project that's all about how we talk about race, gender, and sexuality, and how that changed or may not have changed so much after Gamergate. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of Gamergate. I know it's so, like, speaking of the 2010s, Richie was talking about the 2010s, and like Gamergate was a thing of the 2010s that defined how we talk about diversity in games, especially like in relation to like gender, like primarily gender, but like in secondarily sexuality and race as well. And part of this book is like engaging that idea of like how we may be like in a in a time like this after Gamergate, but also when we have like discussions in, well, America, like that is all about like, oh my God, the DEI, that's the, yeah, but it's like the this is why I do think it's important to talk about this now. And also just to preface this, this is like a book project that has like changed so many times, especially given that this is something that is still emerging. So bear with me as I share this. Now, a huge inspiration for this is pretty much these two books right there. Primarily on race, but like we could easily use this theorizations to talk about like larger discussions of diversity. The first book is like Eduardo Bonilla Silva when he talks about post race and the kinds of racism that we have like in like after the 2020s. It's like and this is that time where you're like, is that racist, not racist, like, so yeah, there's that. And then there's Sarah, but more importantly I have Sarah Ahmed's On Being Included, where she talks about how diversity is performed in institutions and how like this is like it's pretty much a part of our like that it's a discourse that's within our institutions. And this is why there's a reason why I use this, and I'm inspired by this because I want to think about that, especially when we think about the game industry and also the fandoms that are like integrated via media convergence, like how they are like they work discursively. Now, some of you may have seen, I think I had earlier presentations where I had like an outline and like of this book project. This is what it looks like right now. But yeah, some of you have probably seen earlier versions of this, like what this book looks like. I'm talking about like the diversity discourse in games and game cultures. Like in an introduction, I talk about neocolonialism in games like Civ 6 and how that like how developers try to patch that, but a lot of the colonialism is still there. I'm talking about some of the platforms that we have, like specifically I'm looking at Nintendo's eShop because like there was a conversation a few years ago about eShop. The eShop allows everything now, even hentai, and it's like what I found in that chapter is like not they kind of do, but they kind of don't, and that sort of like shows how we talk about gender and sexuality in these platforms. But this is specifically chapter 3, where I'm going to be talking about like French indies, role playing games, and post Orientalism. And basically, what the work in progress chapter is about is like the larger chapter, I mean, is about these two games. One is on Greedfall by the indie company Spiders, and then Clair Obscur Expedition 33 by Sandfall Interactive. And I do want to preface this one because like there are a lot of current discourses on indie development, and like especially after the successes of Larian and Sandfall. And but one of the things that I'm like reflecting on right now is like focusing about these successes misses the point of the networks of privilege that allow these successes to happen. So yeah, there's that. That's like the general idea for the chapter. But the research question that I have, well, specifically for this section, is like, why the Belle Epoque and why now? And this is especially so given that I'm like, Clair Obscur was the game that I played like last year, and then I'm still playing because I cannot defeat like certain bosses of the game that are just too hard, and I need to learn really how to master parrying. But yeah, so we have Clair Obscur like last year, but even before that, we have like another recent title is on Lies of P that is also inspired by Belle Epoque. So this is why I'm the question that I had, like seeing a lot of these Belle Epoque inspired games. It's like, why now? Why? And a lot of this has as I would say, has a lot to do with our post-pandemic context and how we interface this through games. Now, the theoretical framework for the chapter that I'm working on has is basically like these scholars. Firstly, Edward Said is a given like, and he needs one like he does talk about Orientalism specifically as an orientation, but I'm also inspired by Hamid Dabashi, where he reworks Orientalism for a post 9/11 context by adding a dash of Foucault. And what he talks about there is basically how America and Europe pretty much like redeploy Orientalism. Well, mostly in the 2000s because of the war on terror, but what these have done is they created certain hierarchies of knowledge as well, one that looks less hegemonic but is kind of still is in reality. So there's that, but also alongside that, I've been reading in relation to this one is like Susan Sontag's work specifically on photography. Now I'm very well aware that this is on photography, but it has a lot to say on nostalgia, and this is why I've been reviewing this a lot. And in her case, she talks about like how photography gives an aestheticization of the past that wasn't really there in the first place. But also she talks about how like nostalgia works in relation to consumer cultures. And because she points out how photography itself is a way of like mass producing nostalgia, like at least like here. But to add to this, one of the things that I want to add is like how games in a lot of ways do this too. And if there's any point that I'm probably going to be making, it's here's like nostalgia is an orientation. It's a way of seeing that has its own hierarchies of knowledge, and in this case, how we remember the past. Now, in relation to more game study specific theorizations, of course, these are two that I use specifically for this. Firstly, Adam Chapman's like digital games as history, where he talks about it's interesting because like I've been playing Clair Obscur, and then reread this, and he talks about the game space as a canvas used by historians and players to craft history. So it's a fun time for my brain. But also Aubrey Annabelle, and how she talks about games as effective systems that interface well with our daily life. And if we do take these two together, and if we imagine games as digital canvas, we see how nostalgia works, and ways in a way that we remember certain things a certain way because of the things that we see in these games. Now, there's of course a lot of literature on role-playing games, like RPGs as a genre, RPG as transmedia, and of course the discourses around the RPG that I'll be looking at. So, without further ado, this is let's go to the chapter. But I'm gonna talk a little bit about like the first part of the work in progress, and like one of the things that I look at specifically in this chapter is how a lot of fantasy RPGs give a certain aestheticization of the past that reflect how developers and fandoms want to remember the past. And this is why I think I start with Greedfall. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Greedfall. That is a game that is like, it's still fantasy RPG. It's very reminiscent of like games. A lot of people talk about this online as like the BioWare clone, but what they do is like they use the aesthetics of the Age of Discovery, the Age of Discovery, basically the late 18th century. And like part of this was inspired by watching developer videos when they talk about like we want to create a sense of discovery for our players and the sense of wonder that our explorers like had. So, and I feel like when I saw that, I was like, is this like developer code for make colonialism great again? So like, and Western, like one of the things that I'm like thinking about through this is like how Western digital role-playing games become this genre where developers talk about like creating a sense of discovery for players, and by extension, in this case, because these are created by like French companies, it's like this is the way we kind of remember France-ish as an empire, and especially in this case, we have have the nostalgia for the French Age of Discovery when France was an empire. And also, this empire has its own ways of creating certain hierarchies of knowledge. And this is something that I also pretty much do in my analysis of Clair Obscur Expedition 33 as well. Now, this is a game that I really loved and played for so many hours last year. Now, to tell you a little bit about the game, and I'm going to try to make this as least spoilery as much as possible, but there will be spoilers though, like latter part of the of this talk, especially given that a lot of this was shaped by a certain reveal after I was playing the main narrative of the game. But so I'll tell you a little bit when it's so you could probably cover your ears. But anyway, this is a game that's created by Sandful Interactive by a group of developers that was formed from a combination of former Ubisoft employees and also folks that they found online. There's a lot of narratives about Sandful Interactive. If you're interested, you could just look it up on YouTube, and it's an interesting story of how these folks formed online. But also, this is one of the discourse that I've been seeing, that this is JRPG created by a French development company, and we'll talk a little bit about the JRPG in a bit. Now, of course, story-wise, this is an RPG set in they call it a Belle Epoque inspired world that's ruled by painters. So basically, in the story, the paintress kills off people a certain age, and expeditioners are mostly composed of a combination of volunteers and also people who will most likely die and killed off the next year. And you are playing characters from Expedition 33. So, and this is a game that happens in 3 acts with different POV. So, in this case, perspective matters a lot, which I will talk about later. But also, I was watching developer interviews for Clair Obscur Expedition 33 in relation to this, and how Jennifer Jennifer Yen talks about how she was inspired by a dream, which turned into a short story about a girl who leaps through paintings in search of her mother. But also a conversation I think I think one of the developers had with their mother about how the most painful thing for a mother is to lose her child. And this conversation happened in the middle of the pandemic. So this, in the end of the day, this is a story about grief that's resonates in so many levels, and especially for us in a very post-pandemic context where we've seen a lot of it. Now, speaking of nostalgia, there's I would say 2 levels of nostalgia here. Firstly, of course, there's the nostalgia for RPGs reminiscent of Final Fantasy, and I know its lead developer talks about wanting to make a game Final Fantasy 7 or 8. I forgot if it was 7 or 8, but he talks about that in developer interviews. But also on another layer, nostalgia for the late 19th century in France. Now, and to talk about JRPG nostalgia, this is how I feel like this is how developers want to remember the good old games of their childhoods. And this is but they're doing it in a way that updates it for us, because one of the things that Clair Obscur Expedition 33 adds is parrying, which is I don't think in turn-based RPGs back then. But also, I'm also aware that there's a lot of discussions about role-playing games. Specifically, there's if you're interested in that, there's Rachel Hutchinson's and Jeremy Gagnon's work on Japanese role-playing games. But also, another thing that I would recommend is Rachel Hutchinson's work in general. In a way, we have Orientalism on a number of levels, especially in discussion with JRPGs. For firstly, I know there's that conversation of there's this othering of Japanese games within Western fandoms, and this is why we get the tagline of it's a JRPG instead of just an RPG. But also a sense of othering, as well, as Rachel Hutchinson points out, because Japan itself is an empire, but it kind of tries to forget it, even though it's still there in the games. So there's several levels of nostalgia. I feel JRPG nostalgia here already, and it interface it melds well with a lot of discourses that we have. And now to bring that, we go to another layer, which is the history layer. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the Belle Epoque, but in general, when I was reading about the Belle Epoque and also I remember, I think I first read it in art history or something when I was in college, but like I remember it was like the period that people say it's around 1871 to 1914, and it's like literally means beautiful century, a time in French history marked by there's a lot of rapid technological, cultural, and scientific innovation, but also at the same time a lot of social unrest, because this is a time when we had the World Expositions and we got the Eiffel Tower as one of those things, but also um, like this is the time where we got France as a like colonial power as well. And also we need to remember that the name Belle Epoque itself was a name given after the fact. It's because like the First World War really made the 19th century feel beautiful to people who had to live after that. And a lot of that had to do with like the horrors of the First World War. But all that saying, it's like even the name Belle Epoque itself is nostalgic. Now, if we want to talk about like the Belle Epoque in Clair Obscur, you do see it in a lot of the environments. You see like a version of France here. It's like again, this is loosely based, but as you see in this image right here, it feels like Paris. But it's not. It's like a destroyed version of Paris. But also you see like enemies like this. That's like you have the French mime like over there. So we see that over there in Clair Obscur, but also there's when I was thinking about when I was looking at like other parts of the game, you have these characters called the sac à patate. Now the sac à patates are like I know they're indigenous coded, but I know but they also literally mean a sack of potatoes because they don't seem to dress well, but it's played for laughs. But also one of the things that I want to highlight in talking about Clair Obscur is about it's important to think about, as Suvik Mukherjee argues, and how we move around the world and also the perspectives that we occupy. And this is how pretty much like we see colonialism even in our games today. And taking this into perspective of Expedition 33, especially the way you move around like the world of Clair Obscur, it's like you're moving around this world towards mastery. You're getting more and more powerful the more you go towards making that one-shot build and learning to parry well until you could probably beat Simon or the other difficult bosses in the game. So now regarding perspective, painters also are pretty much play like are huge figures in this game. Like I mean, like there's a lot of folks who have pointed out online how like a lot of the French references in Clair Obscur Expedition 33, but like specifically the painters. And like there's some who have pointed out that Renoir, who is one of the antagonists of the game, is a reference to, well, Pierre Auguste Renoir, who was a painter of the time. Also his real life wife is actually named Aline, which is interesting, I find. But also, he's a known Orientalist painter, and it's important to know how French painters at the time had ways of like imagining like places like the Middle East and Asia. And this is what we see in the game. Now, regarding like painters, we see this idea of nostalgia in the idea of painters and how they function in the game. Now, this is where the spoilers for Act 3 are. So like you wanna if you don't want to hear this, like feel free to like step out, or like I won't blame you because if you're still playing the game. But anyway, I've already told you about Acts 1 and 2. You mostly have the perspectives of the expeditioners in Acts 1 and 2. But in Act 3, we get the perspective of this family of painters, because the big reveal of this game is like these painters create worlds and go into them and live out their fantasies. And one of the characters, like Maëlle, actually comes from this family. And the reason why there a lot of this group of like painters, this family is in this painting because after the death of one son, like the mother, who is actually revealed to be the paintress, goes into the painting because of her grief. So the world of the painting literally becomes this space where they enact their grief and slash fantasies. So this is why like I want to ask the question, what is this reminiscent of? Um like specifically, thank you for the reminder. This is reminiscent of the logic of Orientalism, basically, because a lot of these painters went in to these places in, like, whether that's the Middle East or Asia, to to paint these things. So what happens here is that the empire is basically a fantasy space. They go in there, they enact their fantasies, and they leave as they please, not caring if they did damage in the process. Now, to give Clair Obscur Expedition 33 credit, I feel like it's not really comfortable in doing this, and but Act 3, what Act 3 does is, it, like, whether you like it or not, it imposes this perspective on players, and this is why I feel like the final choice is hard. Which matters more, the world of the game or the world of the painters? But yeah, but this is what the game is. Now, there's that question of, like, why the Belle Epoque in 2025? Well, for one thing, we have parallel to the Belle Epoque, we have a lot of social unrest, and there's also a lot of reflections on grief on the post-pandemic context, and also, of course, we get U.S. imperialism in the name of tariffs, and also, like, threats of, I don't know, occupation. So I feel like this is, like, I could list so many other reasons why it, like, probably resonates with us in 2025, but this is, like, the list that I would say. And also, but want to talk about this as well, especially, like, it interfaces, like, the kinds of post-nationalisms that we kind of see when indies like Sandfall are the darlings of the game industry right now, and how fandoms participate in these discourse. Now, I don't think it's intentional, but there, nonetheless, we see it in, like, the fandom discourse as well. Now, to wrap it up, I do think, when we talk about nostalgia of the Belle Epoque and Expedition 33, it's basically, we're reimagining it for our post-pandemic context. But what we see here, of course, is still the logics of Orientalism, and basically its ways of seeing and hierarchies of knowledge, and especially in this game that I don't think intends it, but still does so. And this is where I want to preface the conversation about post-Orientalism, especially in the post-Gamergate context. And I do think it's important to know how these games deploy Orientalism, even when games present themselves to be diverse. So that's it for now for me. So thank you very much. So.
Dr. Ganzon, Sarah, thank you so much. Welcome again, folks. Just to let you know, what Professor Ganzon is proposing here is very deeply resonant, yes, with what's going on, right? The Belle Epoque, a very nostalgic sort of golden washed era in a time of crisis, is very resonant with somebody across our country here that just said, we're now in the golden age of America. Right? Already, that rebranding. History is written by the victors, but also painted by the victors, even though the story's not over. So for some of you here, before we go into break, who know nostalgia literature, Svetlana Boym's other really interesting concept is restorative nostalgia, right? And restorative nostalgia is that idea that institutions and social groups can bring back the past, not exactly as it was, but close enough to make you follow that dominant narrative. Just enough. Let's make America great again, even though we're not going to say which one that is, or if it's already been made great again, right? But right now, let's just restore our energies. We welcome you over there to take a short break. If you just walk through this little curtain section here, there's some free coffee, some snacks. There's a nostalgia cafe behind this wall right here. So please go in, sip, sketch, draw, paint yourselves, and we'll be back for the first panel, Nostalgia in the Shadows, shortly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you again to Dr. Sarah Ganzon for your presentation. That was wonderful. For those of you online, we will be taking a brief break. We will see you back at 11 for our first panel discussion, Nostalgia in the Shadows. Thank you so much. Enjoy your coffee, and we'll see you soon.